Dust to velvets, the scribe's inheritance, from Karachi streets to Oxford halls, unveiling a lost legacy of art and survival. Chapter 3. The Junk Trunk. Naira nodded slowly, acknowledging Peter Hill's question about the incident of revelation. The revelation didn't happen in a vacuum, Mr. Hill. It was forced by necessity. It all started when we were forced to make our lives better by any means necessary. My mother, Najma Bibi, was not an educated woman, and she had lost her father, our only stable financial supporter, just a month before that humiliating move. So my mother, bearing the heavy stigma of necessity, started working as a maid in a private school. My elder brother, Farhan Sarwar, who was 20, quit his studies entirely and began picking up odd jobs, a waiter one week, a helper in a garage the next. These little, painful sacrifices were the new foundation of our lives. They made our existence easier, day by day. My elder sister, Nosheen Sarwar, having recently completed her high school, began tutoring younger students in our cramped home. She would supervise their lessons, and my younger brother Adil Sarwar and I would sit quietly beside them, catching her overflow knowledge, helping us with our own homeworks. Though my life was defined by the instability of shifting homes, my escape always lay within the pages of a book. I was, and still am, a bookworm. But there was a bitter irony in this passion. Book reading was not affordable. Even then, and certainly now, books were prohibitively expensive. The library fees were often a luxury we couldn't spare. This denial was a specific, sharp kind of pain. Thankfully, the isolation of our new mohalla was briefly broken by a student of my sister's, named Naina. She was a year older than me, also a relentless bookworm, and came from an impeccably well-off family. I instantly loved her company. I often found myself defending her from the neighbourhood children, who saw her polished clothes and effortless confidence as an invitation for petty bullying. In return, she granted me access to the thing I craved most. She lent me her books. Through Naina's generous stacks of crisp new novels, the latest mysteries and adventures, I was finally able to step across the chasm of class and enter the wider, wealthier world I desperately longed for. Her father was a great lover of history and possessed a magnificent collection of volumes, the kind of dense, detailed books that covered ancient dynasties, colonial rule, and the long, complex provenance of objects and wealth. It was through Naina's generous stacks of crisp new novels and her father's weighty history texts that I was finally able to step across the chasm of class and begin my necessary education into the wider world I desperately longed for. Though Naina and her father's impressive collection were my primary source of structured knowledge, my hunger for reading was boundless. Books and magazines were luxuries, and a daily newspaper was a financial impossibility. I quickly learned the art of negotiation. I often went to my other neighbours' houses, not to visit, but to read or borrow their newspapers and magazines. In return for this access, for the privilege of absorbing the daily news and the glossy world presented in those pages, I would offer my labour, helping them with small house chores or light cleaning. I understood, even then, that the world demanded an exchange, a payment for every necessity. My early education wasn't solely found in history books. It was gained by sweeping floors, ensuring I had enough current information to keep my mind sharp and my dreams fed. The family pride, as my father stubbornly called it, may have been worthless in rupee terms, but it was not permitted to be filthy. Though the items were sealed away in the small storeroom, my father mandated a deep clean once every 3 or 4 months. The logic was simple. A family's pride should not be dusty, greasy, or muddy. Since my mother, Farhan, and Nosheen were now fully occupied with their jobs and tutoring, This humiliating task fell to me. Alone in the new, cramped rental, I hauled the dusty cartons and wooden containers out of the storeroom. It was a miserable, back-breaking chore, but it was also the first time I, as a conscious, knowledge-hungry individual, actually saw and handled what was kept there. It wasn't just junk being moved, it was history, piece by piece, being dusted off by hands that were finally prepared to ask what that history was truly worth. The bulk of the family pride was concentrated in 3 large containers, but one wooden trunk, intricately carved with old, dusty Nakshi patterns, was the heaviest. It was not locked, but its lid was stuck fast, swollen by years of neglect and humidity. My mother would have simply abandoned it, but the memory of my father's aggressive insistence on keeping the contents safe fueled my teenage determination. Breathing hard in the stifling heat of the small room, I braced my feet against the wall and heaved. With a dry, protesting crack, the lid finally gave way. The sight inside was not cloth, but a meticulous, layered inventory of the past. Several small, heavy pen holders made of dark stone, various tarnished brass kalam of different widths, and a collection of other writing implements, some tipped with what looked like hard, dried reeds, others with fine, oxidized metals. They were the tools used to write history, tucked away and forgotten beneath a thin, brittle layer of yellowed paper. This was the core of the family's burden, and right on top, gleaming dully despite the dust, lay the very brass kalam I had been curious about. The objects in the trunk, the heavy pen holders, the collection of writing instruments, were all technically the same kind of junk, yet the tarnished brass kalam drew my gaze with an unsettling pull. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, cool and smooth beneath the oxidation, and felt utterly foreign in my 13-year-old palm. Yet, as I turned it over, scraping lightly at the dull surface with my thumbnail, a subtle, confusing echo resonated in my mind. I couldn't pinpoint why, but I knew I had seen it somewhere before. The memory was fleeting, like a half-heard whisper, a detail lost in the constant chaos of shifting houses. I didn't remember where or when, but the strange familiarity of this instrument, rejected by my father's generation, but now commanding my entire attention, made it different from everything else in the storeroom. It demanded investigation. Peter Hill, sensing her internal shift, addressed the logical flaw in her story. Miss Sarwar, you are quite right that in your part of the city, anything metallic that was old, tarnished or broken would be quickly sold off to the recycler for necessary rupees. Your mother would have gladly thrown the whole trunk out. How then did the kalam catch your eye? How did you, the impoverished 13-year-old, think it was special enough not to be scrap? Naira allowed a small, knowing smile to finally touch her lips. You are correct that my financial instinct should have been to sell it as scrap metal, Mr. Hill. But the kalam was different. It wasn't categorized with the old stoves or wires destined for the scrap man. It was an heirloom, a piece of my father's family pride. Even when the item was useless, its material was somehow elevated by sentiment. This meant it was protected by the father's aggression, but also that its material, brass, was seen as something more permanent, more aristocratic than common iron or tin. I was curious because the kalam, unlike the dusty books, was small, manageable, and looked like a tool of great importance. It was the only item that carried both the weight of my father's inexplicable pride and the practical shape of something used to create, something that connected to the educated world of the books I borrowed from Nina. I didn't see treasure yet, Mr. Hill. I saw a mystery disguised as a tool, and a tool that might possibly lead me to the knowledge I craved. Peter Hill leaned forward, the gears clearly turning in his mind. So you had the mystery object, the kalam, and the hunger for knowledge. What type of research did you do then to find out what was so special about it? Naira's eyes softened momentarily, a flash of genuine nostalgia warming her polished facade. My first option, of course, was Nina's father's collection. This leads to a rather funny incident. I used to stay at Nina's house for hours, specifically drawn to their study, where her father kept his volumes. He was usually busy with his business, completing paperwork at home, and rarely came in. But one afternoon, he caught me sitting on the floor, deeply absorbed in a very heavy, serious volume of ancient history. Instead of scolding me for reading his books without permission, which I was sure he would do, he was simply amazed that a girl my age could even attempt such a high-level text. He didn't inquire about why I was in his study. He only inquired about how much I had absorbed from the book. He was genuinely shocked by my answers. I hadn't just read the book. I had consumed it, digested every detail. From that day on, the dynamic shifted entirely. He started inviting me over on weekends, and we would sit together, not as a friend's father and a teacher's sister, but as two intellectuals, and we discussed books. That study became my first real library. During those fun times for me, Miss Sarwar continued, her voice softening, my focus was always on finding the answers. And one weekend, while I was with Uncle Hamid, Nina's father, we were reading a book on the history of Sindhi rulers. The specific chapter was about Mian Yar Muhammad Kalhoro, who greatly ruled Sindh from 1701 to 1719 AD. It was heavy, detailed text, but I was searching for anything that looked familiar. Then I saw it. Going through the book, my eye snagged on a detailed, hand-drawn portrait of Mian Yar Muhammad Kalhoro himself. He was depicted seated, writing, and clutched in his hand, looking precisely like the tool I had hidden beneath my bed, was a tarnished brass kalam. Naira stopped speaking entirely. The silence in the London office was now profound, filled with the echo of a forgotten 18th century court. It was the exact same kalam, she whispered, the force of the memory making the admission feel like an absolute confession. Suddenly, the brass kalam was no longer worthless junk protected by my father's sentiment. It was a connection, a verifiable link to a ruler, a dynasty, and the unimaginable wealth of history.